politics, Darshan.
Well, here you are. We're fresh off of After Dark. How'd you guys sleep? You slept well?
Well,
No, I didn't sleep well, but that's besides the
That's
point.
why you're here in the morning.
That's right.
I mean, I think Chris is quite proud to be on this early.
Yeah,
I'm a proud boy. That's right.
he's a boy that's proud. Well, he just said it himself. So we do get into, fraud pod, but lately fraud has been replaced by the administration, which maybe is
The Trump dump.
Trump pod. That's a good one.
The Trump dump. It's all the news about Trump all in one shot.
Every day, actually every hour. Like last week, it was every hour things were changing.
Yeah.
Right now, it seems like it's just daily, which
Yeah.
it's like maybe slowed down a bit. And
Is that
hopefully
slowed
next
down?
week it's weekly, and then we'll get into some stability, some semblance of stability.
Hey, thanks for telling me we went live. I could have said all kinds of things. That would have been inappropriate.
Well,
Like-
Proud Boy,
think about
your
my
Proud Boy
lightsaber back
membership
there?
is enough. Chris is not a Proud Boy. It's a joke. T-shirts coming out at the next SOS.
Mm,
Darshan
Be
with
like
the
Chris.
lightsaber.
Proud boy number one.
there you go.
So, okay, Darshan, you have breaking news. This is like for those that don't want to tune into CNBC or, God forbid, MSNBC. Here's Darshan
give me a sec,
Kulkarni
wait.
reporting live.
Porting live. Okay, is that what we're calling it now?
Yeah, Chris with the weather on Chris with the traffic report on the 10s. It looks like it's fucked out there. And the weather is cold summer, basically everywhere.
See what you did
Hold
there.
on, a wrong screen. Just a second.
So something happened. Trump, basically, let me preface it. Trump made an announcement this morning about
Yesterday, apparently.
Or
I don't know what
yesterday.
time, but yeah.
yesterday, probably when like he woke up in the middle of the night for a snack. And
Diet Coke.
yeah, Diet Coke, and he tweeted.
I don't think he takes diet anything. Let's be clear.
No,
You don't get to the 225-pound, 6'2" physique by drinking Diet Coke.
so-
Hey
Certainly,
man,
but-
he just called me out.
But he's like me. I used to drink Diet Coke all the time. I'd eat.
Dude, I
cake,
drink
ice
Diet Coke all the
cream.
time. I have regular fatty ass Mountain Dew all the time.
So my diet was like Trump for quite some time.
Well, he's the healthiest. His physical is the healthiest any doctor has ever seen.
This is true.
Okay,
He's
so
not one for like being the worst. He'd rather be the worst than be somewhere in the middle. That's
Yeah,
what.
no, he loves the extreme, doesn't he?
Correct.
yeah, like being in the middle, it's like, yeah, you're okay, Trump. Like you could lose some weight, but you're all right. Then he makes that into the doctors have never seen a better physical in their lives.
Or like Darshan saying, I think he'd be fine saying, yeah, the doctors say I'm the biggest fat ass that ever lived. You'd be okay
Yeah,
with that too.
And then he would flip that into that's fake news and they're out to get it and we're gonna put RFK on them.
You know?
See, I think RFK in charge of health is.
So that's related to this. So Trump announced what?
So wait, before
plans are.
I'm sorry, I got a question because I remember Darshan saying this not too long ago. So
Yeah.
Would you have a problem with me being a Supreme Court justice?
Yeah,
Why?
because you're not qualified.
Why?
Because you don't actually know how to write a decision. You don't have a concept of stare decisis.
No, that's not true. There's been many Supreme Court.
I know there have
justices
been, but the question
that
was
had
not.
no legal degree.
No. There's a difference. If you would have said, "Would you be okay with someone who's a trained writer and a trained logistician?"
They weren't trained writers either that were appointed Supreme Court justices. One of them for sure.
I think one of them was, if I remember correctly, one of them was actually a politician. If not the president, I can't remember which one he was. So he was very, very well versed with dealing with laws.
He was well spoken on the topic, but he was not a writer.
Who
Well,
are you guys referring to?
I can't even remember, to be honest.
It was like turn of the 1900s, early 1900s.
Oh, okay. So post Civil War, early.
My
Teddy
position
Roosevelt.
would be, I think that anyone who's going to be a Supreme Court justice. Now, if you're just a justice of the peace, that's a different discussion. But a Supreme Court justice should have a very, very good, and I recognize that there have been others who have not been jurists. But number one, I don't think that's a position you mess around with. And number two, I think that someone who has someone needs to have a really good understanding of how to analyze things from a logical perspective, not from a emotional perspective, needs to be in charge of that.
Well, my point to asking that question
Okay.
was because of this RFK conversation, right? You don't necessarily have to be a professional of the field in order to be able to make decisions upon what is valid.
Presumably,
No,
to
I
get known,
disagree with that as well. I think
Yeah,
that depends on
well-
the field. I think it depends on the field. But I think that there are certain. I don't want me to be in charge of the National Architecture Board. If you may put me in charge of the National Architecture, I don't even know what that would be called. But what
well,
assume
you
that
wouldn't be like someone there. So you'd have to be nominated by the
Well, that's my
administration.
point.
And you would have specialists under you that were specialists in the field, right? That
Sure.
you would take opinions from, and basically it's, are you a good decision maker? Can you take the relevant data and make a good decision based on that data? I think that's more to the point of being the decision maker opposed to being an expert in the field.
So two different things. The first thing law school teaches you is that everyone has a bias. And it's very evident what RFK's bias is. It's very anti-pharma, which I don't have a problem with. I think you can have a bias against pharma. That's a completely fair position to take.
And I actually prefer that to a degree.
Well, yeah, and that's fine. I don't, like I said, I don't really have an issue with that at all. The second question I would argue is that whether or not you have that bias, the question is, do you have an open mind? And I don't
Agreed.
mean literally physically open because a worm got into it. I mean,
No. And I agree with that. You can have all the biases you want, but will you take good advice?
Correct. And who
Or
do
you can
take that
have,
advice
conversely, you can have all the education you want, and will you take good advice?
I think that will you take good advice is a good
that's
place
a good
to
point
be.
too.
Absolutely.
you're-
However, I
If you're
think
well,
when you're
I just want to expand on what he just said. If you're too well educated, you often think your opinion is the only one that matters.
Yeah, I
No,
mean,
I
you do
disagree
see
with
that. You do see that a lot on
You
the
do.
establishment.
You absolutely do.
I think there's something being anti-establishment is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. However, being anti-establishment with no proof of why you have that opinion is concerning, especially when you're making
or
opinions
no
for
true
300 million
alternative,
people.
or no true alternative, or no
Correct.
plan, or no communication of a plan.
Yeah.
You know, I have my gripes about this administration as well, but
Most everybody should about every administration.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think I have had gripes about every administration. So
yeah.
this is not an anti-Trump thing. I'm not anti-Trump like a lot of people are. I'm anti-positions he's taken. I tend to be more of a position person.
And here's one.
Was that?
Wow, is he really on?
Well, no, I was gonna say here's one of them.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you said here's Robert. Never mind. Sorry.
Oh, Robert's calling 16 patients right now. He's a coordinator.
This is right.
Good luck to him, man. This lasts a day. This doesn't last past Friday. Is my prediction. I mean, it's nice to get in the trenches, but there's a reason why he is paid the money he is, and that's not to be calling patients. There's nothing wrong with doing it to put yourself in the trenches and see what the problems are at the root cause analysis. Speaking of which, Trump has done purportedly root cause analysis, and I've told you guys last night.
Yes, you did.
This is the next shoe to drop. I didn't realize the next morning we're going to have a White House executive order.
Yeah.
Darshan, please.
And the one thing, first of all, let's admit that they actually have really good color schemes. Because that's a really badass color scheme. The blue and the white.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
You got to... Here's the one...
Did you see Trump's Gilded Age? So... Let's clown Trump a bit. Joe Biden had a very sensible Oval Office. Like, it looked like things were from IKEA. Trump's is Gilded Age. Like, it looks like things got imported. It's pure gold everywhere.
But that's the thing. Why is none of this gold? I would have
and it's
thought
taxpayer money, by the way, which nobody's pointing out. But those decorations are.
It could be straight from his living room. You never know. Trump.
I mean, I think Doge should look into that. Did you see that before and after Biden's Oval Office versus Trump's?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah,
it's a little tchotchke-esque.
Yes.
Interesting.
But
Anyways,
considering who he is, I'm surprised there isn't more gold on the screen.
yeah, there should be like gold all over
No,
them.
all the white should be gold.
Exactly. At least these should be gold or something.
Right? Or at least the emblem should be gold.
Right.
The
And
art
that
of
would
the
work,
deal.
actually. That would honestly work. A gold presidential emblem does not work.
Yeah. No, I
The art
agree.
of the deal. Now, before we get into this, Darshan, some of the big pharma have already preemptively, like Lilly. Lilly is one. Eli
Go on.
Lilly announced plans to build the, I think it's
Yeah.
$500 billion
Novo did.
plant.
Oh, Novartis did. I thought Novartis announced as well.
Well, Novartis probably did too, but right now Lilly's market cap king, and they kind of seem grounded in the administration's policy and at least on the same wavelength. So they were ahead of this a little. Do you see more
You
pharma
want to
doing
my
this?
screen for a second?
Yeah. Do you see more pharma doing this?
I don't think there's a choice.
Okay.
And I actually,
And Novartis announced 23 billion.
I'm not in disagreement with that. I actually prefer that. I'd rather my drugs were made here if I'm reliant upon them. COVID happens. I don't want to be doing without, but I'm not sure I am in agreement with lowering the prices, honestly.
We can talk through that. I'm not sure drug prices are what they are because of pharma, because I don't think the price. I don't even know if the word prices is accurate in many cases. We'll talk through that. Because a price is what someone pays, and at least that's how I'm defining the word price. But
that's a fair definition.
We have is a sticker problem more than an actual price problem. But we'll discuss that in a minute after we get past this.
All right, yeah, take it away, man. I haven't.
So to be clear, I've not read it. So everyone's reading this with me. So I may have a completely different opinion once I've read this. Yeah. My first time included significant actions to lower drug prescription prices. The message was clear. No, okay, whatever.
Which it didn't.
So he's saying encouraging the development of generics and biosimilar alternatives to higher cost name drugs. I mean, yeah, but everyone's been doing that anyway.
Does this include that 505(b)(2)?
So it depends on how you use the word generic. Most people agree that includes generics.
Okay, so I hope
it's somewhere in the middle.
Listen, I'm heavily invested in one of these right now, and so I'm just asking for selfish reasons. But I do think I've done studies on those kind of drugs.
Yeah.
I do think they are easy to sell to the community from the safety profile aspect. It's easier to understand to a patient, and the budget was comparable to a non-generic. So, from a business and I guess patient centricity perspective, I'm okay with these kind of studies.
So there's a guy called David Fajgenbaum.
Hey man, don't call me names.
Yeah, I was thinking that's quite a last name, quite a surname there.
Well, actually, he had a really good story. So this is the guy.
Net worth.
No, ignore the net worth part of it. This guy's actually really freaking impressive. He actually was dying from Castleman's disease, and he had to invent his own treatment while on his deathbed.
Yes, we talked about.
And what he did was he found a drug that was already available and repurposed it, which would be what a 505(b)(2) does.
Yep.
Which is why I pulled it in. And he then founded something called Every Cure, which is, again, finding FDA-approved drugs and using them for a different purpose.
Now, did you know I've
met him. He's a nice guy.
No, we've talked about him on the show before. Thank you for bringing that up. Chris, you should look into it. It's actually a really interesting story. I was surprised when I looked up the 505(b)(2), thinking that they're going through the Office of Generic Drugs. They actually go through the Office of New Drugs.
Oh, do they? But it's a new indication, so there are multiple reasons. So 505(b)(2)s here. There's a guidance on 505(b)(2).
Yeah, I was shocked. So
they could have been new drugs. Here, 1999 guidance. But
so, do you predict an increase in these?
Based
on the first paragraph you read on the executive order.
based on just a single word.
Yeah.
Here, hold on. By the way, so
we
this
gotta
is
have
how
your
you
hot
get
take, man.
B2.
Your hot take is worth more than both of ours combined.
We'll talk about it in a second. I don't have a problem talking about it. Just want to talk about what a 505(b)(2) is for those people who don't know. Essentially, it's an approved drug often either coming off the market or because it's going generic, or it's on the market but for a different indication. But here's when what you can submit for a 505(b)(2), a new chemical entity, changes to a previously approved drug are the two. And what are the changes? Changes in dosage form, so going from transdermal to solid or whatever, strength, route of administration, substitution of the ingredient in a combination product, change in formulation, changing dosing regimen, change in active ingredient, use of a new molecular entity or a combination product, RX to OTC, change in indication, changing in basically the ingredients. I don't know what a bio-inequivalence is. I've never had to deal with that problem before, etc. So the point is you are changing something about the drug that makes it fundamentally a different way of giving it. So it changes the risk profile of the drug. And why does that matter? So to the point you're making here, and you said, oh, they pay me the same, whether I'm doing a 505(b)(2) or what's called a 505(j), which is a brand new drug. The reason you do a 505(j) is because you have no information on safety and efficacy. For 505(b)(2), you don't necessarily have information on the safety and efficacy because it may be a new dose. So, for example, there's a drug called megestrol acetate. Megase is approved for 5 milligrams. I think it's like every 12 hours, if I remember correctly, and it's usually used to like control like motility, GI motility. That 5 milligrams, if you instead do 800 milligrams, it's used in patients who have failure to thrive, which means they're dying and they just don't feel hungry anymore. So the other drug that does that is literally cannabis. So the point is, when you go from 5 milligrams to 800 milligrams, the safety efficacy profile is completely different.
Right.
So that's what a 505(b)(2) would be. So when you say is it going to bring more drugs to the market, you're effectively bringing a new drug at that point. Yes, it may be the same exact ingredient, but completely different risk-benefit ratio at that point.
But with a known safety profile.
But it's not the known safety profile anymore, right?
Because you're changing the dose, right?
Correct.
But they still get away with, or not get away with, but legally there is a way to speed up the process because of the phase 1. They can do faster.
Phase 1 is going to be completely different. Your phase 1 will be completely different. So you can't skip through phase 1 in those scenarios.
Yeah, see, it's so confusing, man, because you hear like the benefits, and I guess it just truly is case by case basis.
Exactly. Now you might say, to the point you're making, phase 1 in that scenario, do we have what's called a wide therapeutic index? Mm-hmm. For those people who don't know what a therapeutic index is basically there are certain drugs like phenytoin or carbamazepine. Holy crap, I'm really pulling out my pharmacy knowledge right now.
This is not medical advice, God forbid.
Just to be clear, not medical advice. So whether you're talking phenytoin, you're talking warfarin, you're talking carbamazepine, they have what are called narrow therapeutic index drugs. So for them to work, for the safety to be worth the risk you're taking on, it has to be within a certain dosing regimen. So those narrow therapeutic index drugs, you don't change the dose, you don't change the brand of the drug, any of that stuff. On the other hand, for what are called wide therapeutic index drugs, they don't really classify them as wide, mostly because no one really has gone out and measured them. But I would imagine they'd be wider than a narrow therapeutic index drug. And sorry, I can go into a whole thing. So let's say non-narrow therapeutic index drugs, you'd be able to do a lot more wiggle room. But in no scenario are you going a 5 milligram megase, and I can speak to the 800 milligrams of megase. That's just not even close.
I mean, we're deep in the weeds. I would say Chris
you lost me like a long time ago, didn't you? I'll stop.
Chris is also wider than a non-therapeutic index drug.
Fair enough. So let's go back to this. Encouraging the development of generic to biologics to increase competitiveness. I think that's a good thing, but the problem is, how do you encourage the development of generics? The problem you have...
Well, with these 505 similar...
Well, that's one way, but that's not really the only way, right? So the problem with generics is not in the manufacture of them, it's in the reimbursement of them. So there are two industries right now in pharma, which people don't talk about or aren't actually aware of. There's the branded industry where people say, oh, people are charging too much money. And it's a fair argument to make because it can be very, very expensive, sometimes in the millions of dollars. But the generic drug industry is the exact opposite problem. Their margins are so small that they're shutting down. They're saying it's not worth it for me to make this drug because there's too much competition. So when you say I'm going to encourage the development of generics, the fact is that why? Why would I make another drug that I'm likely to lose money on?
Well, when I read that, I think this repurposing, this pathway came out in the 1980s, I believe, to do
the Clawson amendments. I thought 70. Oh no, you're talking about generics. So yeah, the 86, if I remember correctly. But yeah,
are there multiple developers of generic drug for the same drug?
Oh yeah, dozens.
So maybe they need some sort of non-compete for the first generic too.
They do. For 6 months, you get the first one on the market.
Well, longer than 6 months because
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then, so we can have a whole discussion on that. So what used to happen? These are the games people played. So let's say I was making Lipitor. This happened during Lipitor. It happens all the time. But the highest selling drug of all time at one point was Lipitor. When Lipitor was coming off market.
Not Viagra? What?
No, not even close. Not even close.
Yeah, Lipitor. Thank you,
obesity. Joke.
Okay. That would have said the largest selling drug of all time. If I was going down the Viagra joke.
There you go.
Well, some GLP will surpass the Lipitor.
Not in the current form because it's injectable, but GLPs are going to be up there. But the point being, Lipitor was making about $1.1 billion every month.
Wow. So,
I think it was Dr. Reddy's, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. There was a generic manufacturer that said, I can make it. Whoever they were, these branded companies, and I've been on the receiving end of this because I used to work for a generic company at one point. And we used to also make 505(b)(2)s, but that's a different beast. What the branded companies came to us and said, how much will you make with this drug? And we were very ambitious, and we were like, we'll make $50 million. They're like, fine, I'll give you the $50 million. Don't make the drug for the first 6 months.
Well, that makes sense if you're making $1 billion a month.
Exactly. And that's the point.
They could have said, give us $100 million. They would say, deal.
So you can basically corner the market with money at that point.
6 months. You get exclusivity. So you get that exclusivity for 6 months, and then it's a free-for-all. It doesn't work if it's now off patent or you've lost exclusivity. So it's not as simple as, oh, they should have exclusivity or some kind of channel like that. It's helpful, but it's not the only element play. So development of generics is not the full solution. Then there's the biosimilar angle. The FTC did an analysis on this, I want to say in like 2009, maybe a little bit later. And they said, we're looking at developing at that point, it was the BPCIA, but biosimilars. And we think that it will be really cheap to do this. It'll be awesome. So the FTC looked into it. And I think it was FTC, or maybe it was GAO. I think it was the GAO, actually, come to think of it. And they said the cost of developing a biosimilar is about 90% of the cost of developing a brand new drug because it's such a complicated thing. So encouraging the development of biosimilars may not actually help addressing the drug cost problem.
Right. And neither would 505(b)(2)s because you're just introducing new indications. And
exactly.
They become new drugs also.
Correct.
Right? That encourages innovation. It doesn't encourage reducing drug pricing, or it doesn't result in reduced drug pricing.
Then I think this is an interesting, weird statement to make. The U.S. is established a pathway to expand access to lower-cost drugs imported. He just made a big deal about not importing things. I don't understand.
Well, he said drugs are exempt. He did say drugs are exempt.
No, I know he did, but the point is, it's just a difficult thing to reconcile, right? No, we can't import anything without tariffs, except we want you to import drugs.
Well, I mean, that makes sense though, too, right? I mean, if 90% of our drugs are made overseas, we have to import already, and tariffs will eventually cause a price increase to those.
No, I don't think that's what he's talking about. So there are two different. there's importing of the wholesale product and the wholesale drugs, and there's importing of drugs from the pharmacies. So what I think he's talking about in that statement alone, just purely reading that statement, and we haven't gone below, is reimportation of drugs. There's a whole other pathway on reimportation of drugs. So drugs that are being sold in Canadian pharmacies. You can buy Canadian pharmacies at one point and Mexican pharmacies, as you guys know, living next to Mexico. You're allowed to bring a certain amount of drugs over.
Yeah.
But you cannot bring 50 kilos of it.
Yeah, I can't load a truck with it, but for personal use, you can.
Correct. Exactly. So this, I think, goes to reimportation, not to wholesale production.
Okay.
But again, you could be 100% right, Chris. That's been something he talked about at one point. That's the only reason I said that. Because to the point that I'm wrong, he didn't use the word reimported. He said imported, which I find is different from what I would expect.
I've never even heard the term reimport, so
yeah,
that could be the reason why.
Reform efforts include ensure that government-mandated discounts were passed through to patients and stuff being retained. Now, that I think is a real issue.
Retained by middlemen.
This is the PBM problem.
This is the pharmacy benefit managers. Yeah.
Correct. So new price transparency rules. So this, I think, comes out later on and says that we need to address PBMs.
Which are the bane of our existence. The middlemen are eventually going to be wiped out in all industries.
But the middlemen are what they are because we made them that. And we'll address that.
Of course.
They're not. We incentivize the wrong thing, and then we complain that they got incentivized, and that's not fair either.
Well, no, I think the times dictate for different paradigms, and now one is ending.
Maybe that may very well be exactly how you phrase that. New price transparency rules were promulgated to see the actual cost of drugs before purchase. Again, who's the one purchasing? The one purchasing is not the patients or the doctors. It is the employers and the PBMs. So price transparency, I think, is a problem, not because it's not a good idea. I think it's actually a really great idea. But I think that I think it's something ridiculous, like 95% of scenarios, your drug is paid for by an insurance company, which means you never see the actual cost. You think the cost is $4 or $5 until you have to pay cash. And therefore it gets into this whole discussion of what is the actual cost of a drug? Is it the price the PBM pays? Well, that's a different price from, do you include the rebates? Do you not include the rebates? Do you include the wholesale discounts? Do you not include the wholesale discounts? So there are a variety. Do you now look at what I paid Blue Cross Blue Shield? Do I look at the cost I paid the PBM? Or do I look at the cost I paid for, and there are people who are experts who do this, or do I look at the cost that Medicare or Medicaid paid? Those are all different numbers.
So back to the title of the article here. Right?
Yeah.
No,
so really, you
order, sir.
You need this to affect insurance costs for it to truly lower the cost to the patient. It has nothing to do with the drug price, and that was initially part of why I was saying that. Really, let's lower insurance costs. That'll lower our drug costs.
I agree, but that's why I think one thing Trump is right about here is the fact that in the end, the cost eventually paid by the American consumer needs to come down. And we're all part of that problem. Let's be clear about this.
But even is that really a good idea? Because America pays for pretty much 90% of all research R&D worldwide.
I don't think it's as high as that, but it's pretty freaking high. I'm agreeing with you. I don't know what the number is,
but it's high.
It's 100%.
Pays for most of the world R&D.
Yeah.
So we get no drug advancement without profits.
Absolutely. But the question is, should that profit always come from us, is the point you're making, and I agree with you.
It is. I mean, these other countries that negotiate ridiculously low prices, like France is notorious for doing this, and so is Canada.
Absolutely.
They should pay their fair share of this.
Right. So the question is,
why is it on our backs, like most everything else in this entire world as an American?
Well, to be fair, we also use up 80% of the world's resources overall.
Yeah, no doubt. Completely agree. We need to... Sure, but my point is, though, we're paying the top tier pricing,
absolutely,
opposed for everything, unlike the rest of the world.
Yeah, but we also, so here's what you're saying: why are we paying top tier price? Because we use top tier resources.
I am, but I'm saying you can get that same product elsewhere for half the price.
but they're also using half the resources or much less than that.
But it's the same product, right? So
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think I'm agreeing with you, but that's the argument that one.
No, I get it.
I'm not
I
sure
get
I
it.
agree,
I get it. But
Darshan's saying that's our tax for being consumers.
Exactly. That's a nice way to phrase that, Dan.
That's
our
tax
being,
for
I get it, but I think the tax I think the tax is too high. And I think that's
actually
what
agree with you, Chris.
Trump is doing, or at least trying to do, I think.
But I think we're all part to blame. So I'm not one to go, I can't even believe this happened to Dan, you and me when we were looking at the contract. I think we gave up at one point.
Yeah, I mean, we're not getting through this executive order in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, so
Chris called it an article. Very disrespectful, sir. 45 and 47 would be offended. This is a White House executive order.
That's right. Whatever. I apologize.
Whatever.
Apologize to Trump, Chris.
Be a proud boy.
I love how he casually refers to it as an article. Trump would love that.
So
Trump might say the same thing. Come on.
Definitely not.
He would, at the very least, he would call it a beautiful article.
Yeah,
the most wonderful article he's ever seen.
It should be behind a paywall, but it's not because I'm so generous.
Okay, so new price. So my issue is price transparency. So new price transparency rules were promulgated to allow patients, doctors. So I don't know what that means, and I don't know what the value of that is to see the actual cost of drugs. I welcome the idea of it, but to what end? Because it takes a lot of money to see that. So I think, for example, the Sunshine Act was I want to see what my doctor's being paid. How many people have looked at it in the last 10 years?
Nobody, and it's used as a weapon.
Correct.
It's weaponized to negotiate sites down, as opposed to being used for what it was originally intended to do, which is to provide transparency for what physicians are getting paid by pharma.
And if anything, it actually increases the cost because now someone has to be in charge of doing all of that.
There's regulatory requirement, additional regulatory burden, if you will, which is seems to be anti what this administration. If we can kind of skim through this to give people an overview and they could double click.
Well, I think this is the skimming. That's why I was kind of sticking up here because they're talking about all the components in there.
But we're barely on the purpose. I don't even know. But
once you get past this, then everything else is going to reflect that. Is the point I was making.
Okay.
So insulin co-payments, we were fine. Instead of patients and taxpayers are forced to. So insulin co-payments were capped for Medicare beneficiaries and manufacturers instead of patients and taxpayers. I feel like they have this is miswritten.
Too much Diet Coke, maybe, for aspartame.
Hopefully, he's not the one personally writing this.
They need a better editor for the articles.
Yeah. We're forced to foot the bill to the provision of larger discounts. I don't really know what he was trying to say there. I also called on Congress to come to the table to help sustainable. Okay, fine. I propose a test of an innovative new mechanism that would prevent drug manufacturers from charging our patients much higher prices than those found abroad. And that's a fair point, and I think that's to the point you're making, Chris. I think that's a fair point to make.
Unsurprisingly, the Biden administration reversed, walked back, or neglected many of these initiatives.
Actually, one comment that I think would be very, very interesting is you were talking on GLP-1s. Do you know what Ozempic? No, Wegovy costs. Not Wegovy. What's the other one? One of the GLP-1s.
Ozempic, the one made by Novo Nordisk in Denmark. No.
Ozempic is not Novo though. I think it's Lilly.
No, Ozempic's Novo.
Is it?
Yeah, Novo is. I'm in this world because of our site. I want to do Novo studies, and I have yet to get one. And Novo, if you're watching, we love you. We're Americans. We embrace you, fully embrace you. Here in Yuma, Arizona.
We go. Yeah. Okay, whatever.
Yeah. It's Ozempic. So it's made by Novo.
Is Ozempic? And
they bypass. Well, the argument is they bypass the.
No. Oh, Mounjaro is Lilly. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So I was wrong.
Yeah, but the point is, to your point, they all would be the similar.
Yeah. The point I was making there. The point I was making there is
here.
It's about $1,500 in the U.S. for Ozempic. Now here's what did I say the other one was? Not Wegovy. What was the other one?
Mounjaro.
Mounjaro.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any
That-
GLP sponsors?
Lily
send me
Manjaro
CD.
to cost. Essentially, they said it's going to cost like I think they said $50 instead of the $1,500, which I think is the problem.
And that's so there's a multi-pronged approach there. I hear some of the pharma going direct to patient now with their own online
So I
pharmacy.
can talk about direct to patient as well. Do you want me to get into that? Different beast,
No,
different conversation.
no, because we'll never get through this executive order.
I know.
But
Okay,
we have covered it before, so
we have.
historians can go listen to the archives. But they're doing it. It's a trend. It's one of the tools we now have to be able to maybe be more aligned with the White House
Goals.
executive orders.
So Biden walked back. So what you're seeing is, and I think this is an interesting comment, and I want to come to this one that I think would be interesting, the pill penalty. But Biden administration got the Inflation Reduction Act, which
Inflation Reduction. We talked about this last night, man.
we did.
Biologics versus small molecules. The incentive has been, because of the patent protection, much longer. I was reading 11 years. I'm not an attorney, but 11 versus 4 versus 7, and now they're trying to get rid of that so that you incentivize more small molecules to be
here. Biologic exclusivity is 12 years.
12 years. Pardon me. 12.
This includes a 4-year period before the application can be submitted, followed by an 8-year period before approval.
That's right.
So
that's right. Versus small molecules is like 4 or 7.
Yeah. So that is what he's referring to as a pill penalty.
Which is why everyone and their mama started doing MABs. Which is why at my site, no doctor's excited about monoclonal antibody. As soon as we see a study with a MAB, we're like, this is like another Me Too. Like, why would we do this?
MABs are not necessarily Me Too's.
But like the whole, like the idea to the mind of the PIs, they are. They're like, we need another MAB. He used exactly this term.
No, that's the type of. I'm surprised your PIs are saying that, because that's not how MABs work. It's the type of antibody. It's not a Me Too thing.
No, not a Me Too. That was a bad way to phrase it. But another MAB. He said,
sure.
Another
they
MAB.
can be for different indications. It's like saying another aspirin. Well, aspirin and Tylenol are completely different things. So.
Of course. But ultimately, they mess around with the immunity and white blood cells and all that stuff. And that's where he's getting at.
Oh, his concern is more that they're messing around with immunity. Okay, fair enough.
Correct.
But it's not always to immunity. You can have monoclonals that don't target immunity.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And they have all kinds of MABs now because
exactly
the IRA incentivized it, right?
I don't know the IRA off the back of my hand like that.
That's a whole nother shoe to drop. I mean, these are hours of like pontificating we need.
We haven't even gotten to Section 2 yet.
No,
so
we haven't got to Section 2, and Chris is still referring to this as an article written by Center Watch, perhaps.
Just to irritate you guys. That's the purpose.
It's not me. I'm not Trump.
So this program has the commendable goal of reducing drug prices. Cool. Its administrative complex and expensive regime has produced far lower, much okay.
It's saying it's expensive.
Thus far much lower savings than projected. Maybe.
Yeah, translation is expensive.
Imposes price control on small molecule drugs.
MABs are expensive, and it's stifling small drugs.
But he's saying that it's stifling small molecules, so fine.
Yeah.
So this is now saying
a pill penalty, colloquially known as a pill.
This I think is concerning.
The United States that it is the policy of the U.S. that the federal health care programs, IP protections, and safety regulations are optimized to provide access to prescription drugs at lower cost to American patients and taxpayers.
But this is something that should be decided by Congress, not by the executive branch.
Right. Now, it sounds crazy when opponents will say, oh, he's getting rid of IP. It's for this particular thing of large.
But you can't do it that way. You're part of international agreements that agree on what that IP should look like.
Well,
sure.
So you can't say I'm going to have 5-year protection for patents. Like, that's just not how it works. You're part of a global treaty that regulates. You might still say I'm going to withdraw.
He doesn't like this administration. Does not like being a global anything. They want to be US.
I think everybody has the point now that Trump wants to break the system.
The global system.
The
Yes.
thing is, it'll take decades to fix the mistakes he's making, and he's not afraid to make mistakes. The problem is that fixing those mistakes is
But-
very, very difficult.
But that's your opinion on whether or
Which
not
part?
these are mistakes.
No, but he's agreed that there have been mistakes. Ignore me.
Sure. But what I'm saying is breaking the system in terms of all of the regulations in place to protect, whether it be other countries, our own country, companies of other countries, whatever the case might be. Yeah, there will be mistakes, especially when you're doing it so quickly, right?
And that's my concern. I don't have a problem with changing the status quo. I think that's totally fair.
But that's the problem with our system in the United States. If you only have 4 years to change things,
Well,
and
he had
sure, but let's be real, he didn't do anything in the first 4 in regards.
That's on him, isn't it?
Well, yes and no, but that's a totally different topic. But
Okay,
the point is even at 8 years,
We ain't getting through shit of this executive order.
it's not long enough. 8 years is not long enough to change the system when every other person is like, no, the system's fine, whether paid for or not.
But then maybe the system's fine if every other person thinks that.
Well, no, that's because of those in power behind the scenes in the curtain are saying, let's keep this system.
Let me rephrase that. I'm not saying that the system itself is fine. The system has created dependencies
Yes.
that have value. So I'm not saying that the system should be where it is. I'm all for changing the system.
Listen,
Okay, so
value for some and to the detriment of others.
So back to the article.
The article. Yep.
Thanks.
What would be your solution to lowering drug prices?
I actually have a different solution to lowering drug prices altogether. I would say create risk-based IP. People give up IP based on. So instead of you taking away IP protections, people give up IP protections. So if you are the government and you go, I will make sure that I'm going to de-risk your investment, but in exchange for de-risking your investment, I want you to give up 5 years off the top of your IP. Do you agree to do that?
So we did that with Pfizer and the vaccine, but minus the 5 years.
But
right?
my point would be you add in the 5 years.
Right. Okay. So that
I
it
would-
can more
I would
quickly
vote
go.
for
So it can more quickly move to generic, is what
Correct.
you're proposing.
Correct.
Maha, if anyone knows anyone at Maha, Darshan is available. He loves RFK, so he would fit right in.
So let me ask you this: is there any way to open this up to the marketplace, right? Because competitors.
I'm sorry. What is this way opening up?
Drug R&D for drugs.
Okay.
Drugs, right? Is there any way to open up the marketplace, but still make it worthwhile for the development of new drugs? Is there any way to open the marketplace to competitors, right?
Yeah.
So who can make the best product at the lowest price usually wins, right? But if you lower the prices too much because there's too much competition, wouldn't that kind of be a disincentive for drug development?
That's what you have with the generics. You lower the drug price too much because there's too much competition. So that's a choice.
I don't see how you get out of that system of just what we pay for drugs.
You de-risk it so that people can make the money they want up front, knowing that they are not.
But then that still falls back on the taxpayer, right? Because they're paying ultimately for.
Here's what the taxpayer wants right now, and this is my concern. The taxpayer wants all the advantages without any of the risk, and that doesn't work.
Sure.
Here's what you're asking drug companies to do. The average cost of bringing a drug to market on average is, this is going back a few years.
2 billion, right?
4 billion. It's about 4 billion, which lands up being about, I think it's $1.7 million a day.
And does that 4 billion take into account all of the failures?
It does. It does. So the idea is, I had to go through all of these other things to get this one drug out there. Mm-hmm. That's just the cost of doing business.
And it makes up for those 18 others that didn't make it.
Correct. Otherwise, I couldn't remain profitable. I couldn't exist.
Right.
The point is that,
and that's why biotechs are so binary. You know, you have an approval or rejection. I mean, it's like literally the difference between billions or nothing.
Sex and complete failure. I'm out of business.
Right. And that's why I go, you're telling someone, go to the casino every single night, bet $1.5 million every single night. Don't even know if you won or not. Walk out the casino, do it again tomorrow. and
Well,
do that
10
for 20 years.
20 years.
Not to hijack this, but that's my issue with like hedge funds and all of these other systems where they are going to the casino. Then when they fail, so they get to keep the profits, but when they fail, they're bailed out, right? It's such an asinine
I have an
thing.
issue with that. You don't get to have it both ways.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you fail, you fail.
Exactly.
And if you succeed, now the issue with the hedge funds was it was the collapse not of the hedge funds, which I would have no problem with, but of the entire monetary system. That's
No,
what happened.
I would have preferred that.
2008.
Honestly, I'd
Well,
prefer that.
well, but
Because
let's-
because they get to gamble and they pay no risk.
Sure, hedge funds suck. The Wall Street GFC was horrible, but let's like drug price. We only got like
Well,
what 10
sure,
minutes
but
left.
I'm just saying this is embedded in our system,
Yes, yes.
unfortunately.
Well,
and I
everybody
don't-
knows that, and I think that's why Trump won. I think he spoke to
Yeah.
those people.
And this is why the system's being broken to a degree.
So we haven't
Yeah.
even gotten to Section 3. I'm thinking we should come back to Section 3 because this is your favorite section, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, I just think it has the most direct implications to R&D. I think if they stop incentivizing MABs, they're going to go.
They
to
don't
small
get into
molecules.
MABs at all. They're looking at just price controls.
Right, but that's if you go under the hood, that's what it is. It's
No, that's
patent lives, and or
no,
you
they're not
talking
getting
about
into any of that. This is just purely going to reimbursement.
Yeah, I'm not going to agree with any.
okay.
I do not agree with price controls. I really don't.
I do.
I don't.
But my price controls position comes from a place of ignorance, quite bluntly, because I don't know enough about price controls and how they work.
I just don't want the government involved.
No,
in
I
our
know what
everyday
price
lives.
controls
That's
are.
it. That's
No,
it. Just get 'em out.
I get that part of it. I had that rudimentary understanding. I'm talking more the devil's in the details. And how have other
Certainly.
countries done it? So you, for example, in NICE in the UK, they use what are called quality measures, qualities. And they have a system. Essentially, when I last looked at it, I want to say like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, does $30,000 per year per patient result in a specific type of change? Someone had to do that pharmacoeconomic analysis. And if it's worth it, great. If not, it was a binary result each time. And I know Canada does it differently and France does it differently and blah, blah, blah. So I think price controls to the extent it brings down the price makes sense. Now, price controls for the sake of price controls is stupid. But to the point you were making earlier, we still have to get new, better drugs out there.
Yep.
And if we simply go, we're going to cap you at the knees for getting any profit, but still expect you to go take that gamble every single night.
Right. Those risks.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's why I don't agree with it. I think
But that
you're stifling innovation. You just are.
so de-risk it, and then you'll have a better conversation.
I like Darshan's idea of de-risking. We've never gotten into that or double.
No, I would have to think about that for a little while, but it doesn't
Yeah.
sound, on the face of it, doesn't sound like a horrible.
I wouldn't mind
idea.
Darshan in charge of HHS, honestly. Can we make that happen for the next administration?
Sure. Yeah, next time I'll be head of HHS. That's
You're
fine.
young as fuck, man. You can do it.
Oh, one day. So the guidance shall provide the transparency, provide prescription drugs within 180 days, shall provide recommendations stabilizing. I don't know what that means. Shall work with Congress to modify the Medicare price negotiation program to align the treatment of small molecule prescription drugs with that of biologics. Okay,
See, that's where I get into.
so this is your the pill
It's my
penalty that we
theory.
talked
I have
about
a
earlier.
theory on this, but yeah, we can get into that theory later because I want to see what else is on this thing.
And ending a distortion that undermines relative investment in small molecule prescription drugs. I don't think there is a disinvestment in small molecules.
Well, there is
small
because you have
molecule
a 4-year gap. There's a 4-year more exclusivity if you're developing a biologic versus a small molecule.
Yeah, but
So
that doesn't
everyone's
mean
gonna
that-
go towards the biologics.
No, that's not how that works, though. You just
But
try to
that's
make
what
a
they're
profit in
doing.
4 years. No, for example, if what you were saying was true, Pfizer would not have been working on a small molecule GLP-1.
Well, of course they work on them too, and especially GLP-1s. Those are like the latest hot thing.
No, my point being, all you're doing is just deciding where how much time you have to collect the profit. So let's say it's a $4 billion drug, and you have to collect. I'm making up a number here. You have to collect 20 billion for it to be worth it, right? 'Cause
Right.
You're taking that risk. So you've got to collect 16 billion.
Yeah.
Now you have 4 years to collect 16 billion, which is 4 billion a year, or you have 8 years, which is 2 billion a year. Either way, you might have an impact on pricing, but not on incentivizing whether
right. And the fair market theory or whatever it's called. I mean, it should, in theory, it should attract more competition to those more perceived to be lucrative markets and eventually stabilize things. But for some reason, it hasn't, or this administration's not happy with it.
No, I think it's the second one, but I'm not convinced that I don't know if that's true. I also think this is where I heard, and I could be wrong, but like Pfizer's CEO and Novartis' CEO, et cetera, were in that room at one point. They were talking to Trump.
In the room where it happens, the room where it happens.
Exactly. But the point is, those guys are all small molecule manufacturers. So definitely see that.
Of course, they're all everything, like Pfizer.
Well, no, I don't think Pfizer has, I could be wrong, but I don't think Pfizer has too many biologics.
I mean, at the scale of Pfizer and these top 20, they all have everything. They all have biotechs in their incubators. They have everything.
Let's see, Pfizer biotech.
They sometimes they don't even announce it. Chris and I have been to these like big pharma sponsored incubators where a bunch of small biotechs.
But incubators are different. Incubators, you don't actually.
It's still involved because they get involved if it's like the NIH. It's like a mini NIH. We're gonna fund some of this. Once it seems lucrative, we're gonna jump in on it more.
So my friend actually runs incubators for some of these companies.
Okay.
You're basically creating a place for them to work. You don't actually have any IP in them. You might choose to.
Not yet. Okay. Yes, but you get first dibs on
Not
when
necessarily. Not necessarily. You're just
legally no, but like the way it works is like, listen, I know we're like 4 weeks out, but we see the results before others.
That's fair.
You know, pragmatically, they do. Legally, I know you're an attorney, and this is not legal or, God forbid, medical advice.
There you go. Or apparently
political advice.
Or political. Do not depend on me for political advice.
Especially when we're reading articles, such well-written articles as this one.
There you go, Dan. There you go. You're on board now.
Journalist. What journalist wrote this?
The best written article.
The journalism here should
win a Pulitzer. We need to call it because we're not going to make that much progress.
Can you at least scroll down to see what else is here?
Reducing the high cost of drugs.
Nobody cares about that.
All drug acquisition cost based. Access to affordable life-saving stuff.
Reevaluating the role of middlemen.
Oh, this is that FDA thing. Accelerate approval of these drugs.
Of generics, biosimilars, combination products, and second-in-class brand name medications. What does that mean?
Moving things to OTCs.
What's that second-in-class brand name medication?
I don't actually know what a second-in-class is, so I don't actually know what that means.
Damn it, Darshan. Okay. Increasing prescription drug.
Oh, I get it. No. I just realized what he's talking about. That's easy. So let's say it's Pfizer comes. I'm trying to think of think Viagra. Viagra is first in class. Okay. Cialis was the second.
Okay.
So the idea would be the second one has a lower burden than the first one because the FDA has figured out what they're going to do with that one. So it's easier to accelerate approval.
It is easier to accelerate approval. And generally, they have more time to make it better, safer.
I don't think it goes to safety because you're usually doing these in parallel. Right?
Okay, better. At least better.
Yeah, the FDA has had time to mull things over a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah.
Increasing prescription drug importation. That's not. I mean, it's been available now for several years. We haven't made any progress on that.
Yeah, we discussed this for a while. Transparency for PBM.
Here's the anti-competitive stuff.
Anti-competitive by prescription drug manufacturers. Within 180 days of this order, the secretary or his designee shall conduct joint public listening sessions.
So remember I told you about the big pharma saying that we'll just pay off a drug company to stay off the market? That was part of the anti-competitive stuff.
Yep. Which it is anti-competitive.
Oh, it's totally anti-competitive, but that's why there have been loads and loads of lawsuits on that.
So the executive order is done. So we did get it.
I assume that there are many other versions of that.
I mean, but we discussed most of it without even looking at the others because we.
Well, to be fair, I don't understand some of this stuff because that's what
I don't think. To be fair, anyone understands a lot of this stuff, but the market doesn't understand what's going on either. You guys watching this?
I have not looked at the market. I don't look at the market right now. I think I'd probably throw myself off a cliff if I did.
Yeah, it's like that TikTok meme, the guy drinking Clorox.
It's not that bad. Not that I really care.
No, I'm not looking at it, but okay.
Okay.
It's down 4,000 points from the high. So.
But this is great, guys. I mean,
Well, we can't go yet.
No, go ahead, Chris. And by the way, hold on. This is so... Chris, I just realized what shirt is. Your camera's so blurry. I didn't even see you the whole time till now. Chris could not wear that shirt last night, yet somehow it's clean.
It's not clean. It's not clean. So
you wore... Wow, guys. We should have done this last night. Chris, unbelievable. It's all I got to say, man.
It was wet yesterday. It's whatever t-shirt I wear on Mondays, it becomes my gym shirt the rest of the week.
Wow.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
Well, I'm just facts life.
That is extreme laziness.
It's a habit from back in gym in high school and middle school.
I don't think that's hygienic. This is not medical advice.
It's hygienic.
It's not hygiene advice anymore.
Yeah, did you take your gym clothes every day after school? No, I sure didn't. No one did.
Actually, I think I changed gym clothes every day after school. Yeah.
No. You had a locker.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in this country, to be fair, so I may have had a different experience.
Darshan immigrated here when
after high school?
17, 18?
After high school.
About 18 or so.
Well, in high school here, when you go to gym class, you have a locker. You put your gym clothes in there. You take them out. You put in your street clothes after gym.
Yeah.
You switch back in and put your gym clothes back into that locker.
Sure, but
that locker goes home on Fridays.
Chris, but there's one difference though. You're an adult now.
It still operates the same way.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Any other questions?
Yes, I want to go back to my argument we initially started with. So Darshan, when I advise clients, when they ask what should be some considerations for hiring a coordinator, right? And I'm going somewhere with this, so give me a moment. Mm-hmm. I tell them there's 3 qualities I would look for hiring a coordinator, right? It's attention to detail, right? Can you multitask? Kind of a multitask, right? Can you start a task, not end it, start another task that now takes precedence, and then come back to that task, right? Which is a common occurrence. And then lastly, can you write a decent sentence? Right? Because everything's written in research. Okay. I've stopped advising people on that last one, right? Because I've seen people I've talked to people who do not speak great English. Mm-hmm. And I've read the writing and it's like, it's perfect, right? So with AI, that's where I'm going. With AI, you do not have to be able to write a reasonably good sentence anymore, right? Now it takes a little additional time to use AI opposed to just writing it out yourself. Dan's looking at writing a book using AI, right? Which
with assistance, because Darshan taught me that you don't own the IP if it's AI, so the AI will be my assistant.
We're not too far away, Darshan. I would speculate at most 2 years, where I could be a Supreme Court justice and just have the system write my analysis, so long as I can read it and determine that yes, this is what I was looking to say, written in legalese. I think we're 2 years tops away from that.
Which is
just
why I'm
my opinion.
No, that's fair. But did I say right? Maybe I need to phrase that better.
Well, no, I know what you're meaning. You're saying take precedents, right? Previous legal opinions, and apply that to your ruling, right? Which I think that's very minimal when it comes to the Supreme Court, because what you're looking at is the Constitution ultimately.
No, you're not, because you're often basing it on why was the precedence what it is. Yes, there's the constitutional history of it, but it's also what have the other courts done? Because what you're going to do ultimately is going to be disruptive.
Certainly.
So you have to be looking not just at.
This is certainly a huge rabbit hole, and I know you got to go. But with the recent Roe versus Wade decision, which ultimately most legal authorities say is correct, it should be based on a state because of the 10th Amendment, right? It should be the authority of the state because there is no language in the Constitution for this ruling, right? All you have to be able to do is read and understand what you're reading, in my opinion.
There's so much more to this, but there's so many comments. I'm trying to
Darshan doesn't have time.
This is what happens when you get Chris on.
Edie told me that when I talk, I need to do a better job putting it all together. Like I have all these ideas, but I
Edie,
need to
give
do a better
Darshan a
job.
break, man. He's the best boss in the world, right? Or is Edie your boss? Forgot.
She bosses me around. It's probably
Yeah.
true.
Fair enough.
But no. So the short version of what I was saying was, first of all, you've got to decide what version you follow. So some people will say Scalia, for example, was one of the originators of the originalist theory. Is essentially saying you look at the writers of the Constitution and see what they were intending, and that's the basis on which you make a decision. Some people, so they're called originalists, and that's fine. That's one position to take. He believed that, but the people who believed the exact opposite was RGB, RBG. Sorry, RBG. And she came from the perspective you have to contextualize it in what today is. And they were great friends, and I love the fact that they were such great friends. They just respectfully disagreed.
But see, I disagree with that analysis, right? Sure, it's a living, breathing document, but guess what? Congress makes those decisions, right? Because they pass law, and then the Supreme Court rules on that law. So the Constitution, because the Constitution could be changed, right? You do not need to interpret according to modern day anything, right?
No, I disagree with that because your law has to still be consistent with the Constitution. So if your Constitution is not
but what you used Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, yep, RBG.
As your authority of this, and I disagree with that analysis because you have Congress that can pass law, in which then the Supreme Court makes a decision on it. If you want to pass a law that's questionable, whether it's constitutional or not, go ahead, right? That's what the people representatives are there for. I disagree with
Darshan on this, but I agree with your point.
I completely disagree with that analysis. I think you should make your decisions based on what was intended by the founders. That's who wrote it. That's what we based this country on. Personally, that's my opinion.
And you're allowed to have your opinion. That's the beauty of the country, right?
Safeguards in place with Congress and to be able to account for this. I am kind of in between. I think you should have both of those. That's what makes this country great, is that tension. That's what provides progress, because being too rigid doesn't enable.
But that's what Congress is there for, right? You elect your representative and they make those changes for you.
Oh, and they could be paid off. Again, I'm going to keep referring.
Everyone gets paid off.
I feel like he's getting a cut every time he shows that book. Is there a referral link?
Man. Robert Caro I don't do that shit, man. Robert Caro, amazing dude. He's 90 years old, writing on a typewriter. He's finishing the 5th volume of LBJ series. Amazing. Everyone should go read that.
Write it on a typewriter?
I know.
I'm sure he's a great writer, though.
I'm dropping a philosophy book soon. Clinical research.
You mean ChatGPT's writing it?
No, it's helping me, but you can't have AI do philosophy. You have to step outside of the system.
Fair enough.
Well,
gentlemen, we are well past our time.
Well past. Respect to that article you just showed.
The article,
Great article. Great
article.
The best article.
Rotten Tomatoes will give it a 90% tomato rotten. All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Subscribe, comment, share. Go follow Darshan. Go follow Chris too, but he's
you know what I haven't seen from Chris? One of his newsletters.
Yeah, come on, man. Like you've been so slacking on that. It's like your gym shirt metaphor as your article writing.
It doesn't get washed. I got it.
Horrible. You threw it in the locker and it's smelling, growing bacteria. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Go follow Darshan.
Have a good day, everyone.
And Chris.
Take care.
Bye-bye.